So, hi, my name is Tyler, and let me introduce John Maroney and Dave Shanley. So, I think when I first met you, I was looking at one of your companies, which was a hardware company. What was it called again? It was
Called Ultra devices?
Ultra Devices. It was a UV detection device that you wore and had an app associated with it. Some of my friends are actually in your little video for that, which was really cool. And then I found out that John also invests his own time and money into startups, and then now that kind of led him to where he's at now. Would you talk a little bit about where you're at now with Oak?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm with the Oregon Angel Fund. I'm a partner on the management side. OAF, as we call it, is the most active investment company in town. We'll invest about $8 million this year in early stage technology companies. Everything from $100,000 to $2 million. And we've invested in a lot of really great companies, including my Notion right here. So, and you know, Jama, and we've got about 40 companies we've invested in over the past 10 years. So, and prior to that, I was an entrepreneur.
That's great. Lots of position from seeing companies grow and also struggle. And Dave Shanley, I met him when he was building Crowd Compass, which was later bought by Cvent. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then now you're at
Notion. So it's a new company based on everything we learned growing and building teams, and just how do you create that culture of continuous improvement and give teams the tools they need to manage and understand their internal data.
So that comes from a lot of experience. So could you tell me a little bit about an experience in one of your successes before we talk about?
Sure. I mean, I think success is defined by survival. I think anybody that survives is successful at some level. But yeah, we took the company from my apartment. This is Crowd Compass. We took it from my apartment, bootstrapped it to about $1.5 million annual recurring revenue, and that's not particularly easy to do. So there's a lot of
in a succinct amount of time, correct?
Yeah, in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So lots of blood, sweat, and tears, and we were entering a new market, so we were kind of creating the market at the same time. So,
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, before we talk about failure, how about you, John? Do you have a specific success that you'd like to bring up?
Well, I started a company called Free Range, doing mobile software at pretty much the same time as Dave. We were early pioneers on the mobile side of things, and same deal. We grew it up. We made apps for big media companies. So we ran the Wall Street Journal's first mobile products, Associated Press, Reuters, a couple of NFL teams, about 350 total, and sold that company off.
That's great. How about either one of you? There's no order.
We actually sold this company 2 times.
Oh, two times.
We sold it twice. We sold it. We went and did 2 years. We spun it back out. We sold it again.
Wow, that's a good story. So, how about a story of struggle or success? Because I mean a failure. Because I feel like people view failure as completely shutting down, but it could be a number of things along the way. Either of you have a good story about it?
Yeah, I have lots of stories.
Pick one good one.
Yeah, I mean, so
you're building me a segue to the questions.
Yeah. So one story at Crowd Compass that was a failure but not shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
Was we had gotten to this place where there's growth. We were bootstrapping, so we're funded by our own revenue. We had grown. We had hired people. You're obviously at the place where you're delivering products to your customers, so there's customer service, there's like all of these elements, and it gets a little bit more expensive to deliver when you have actual customers. And we had gotten to this place where we had ramped up operations, and revenue was still super lumpy. So we had these roller coaster months where it was a total wild card on if we were going to be able to make like payroll right at the end of the month, and it would like come in at the last day of the month. And we actually had a blip where our forecast looked just kind of like completely unpredictable. We had this crushing fourth quarter. We had to lay off people on staff, which is like easily the hardest thing to do because they're good people. They're people that you spend a lot of time bringing onto the team, and they're like family. And then like the month after we lay those people off, which was like really, that is the definition of failure. We had like an epic month.
Wow.
And so it's just that, that contradiction of, hey, we're like going to crash and burn and hit the ground, hit the mountain. And then suddenly like everything's great. so yeah.
So, I mean, that kind of brings up the kind of linear line. People think if it's start and success, but it typically is this. Sometimes you're going backwards and then you're going forwards. Do you have a similar story? Maybe a total crash and burn, if you have one in your repertoire?
The very first company I ever started, I shut down with It was a company that I started with a former employee of mine, and a doctor. We had a great setup. We were working on archiving photos for plastic surgeons. And we launched the product. We did a trade show, customers lining up, and the guy that was going to come and take over the company went and got a job at Apple. And we had customers waiting to give us money, and I would not take their money, and they were calling and saying, please take my money, give me my product. And I realized I didn't want to do it myself. And I was really doing it for that guy who was now working at Apple. And so we just shut it down. I said, I'm not doing it. We're closing it down, and moved on to the next thing.
Well, I think that makes sense, especially when I'm looking at some of these questions. And Teresa from Tao, I think, wrote this one because it says Teresa next to it. So that's what I'm assuming. So failure happens a lot in startups, and it happens in all these different shapes and forms, partial, fully, and then everything in between. So what she asked is, how do startups learn from previous mistakes? And this is also, you can start raising your hands if you do have them, but I have a couple to go through.
The hard way, usually, and quickly, hopefully quickly.
Yeah.
Because you're going to run into lots and lots of failures. You know, your product, you launch the product. We launched the product. We had this great, awesome news. This was back before the iPhone. We had a great news reading product for BlackBerries, and we called it, and there was no way to get news on your phone. So we had this product. We made it. We tested it. It was awesome. We decided to launch it, and we called it Free News, and we charged $20 a month. Didn't really work so well. So and people let us know pretty darn fast that that was not a good idea. But from that, we decided to move on to other things, which is, from that actually that pretty epic failure on the marketing side, which was all my doing. And a newspaper editor called and said, "Hey, could you put my newspaper logo on there and just put my news on there and put my ads on there?" And I said, that's kind of an interesting idea. I can't today, but let me get back to you. And that sort of was the birth, like the failure of the complete failure of a newsreader at that level for a consumer led us to that other product. And I think that's, you got to learn from those mistakes. You got to take them and say, yep, now move on.
So kind of like a feedback loop.
Yeah.
Shrink it as much as humanly possible. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's more about setting expectations and building a framework around what success and being clear about what failure looks like.
So measuring.
So you don't know, how do you know you're failing? Like, what is, you can define that up front. And so you have an upfront definition of failure and certainly an upfront definition of success. And so that's completely transparent on the team. So people, you know where you are, right? And if you're kind of like ruthless about that, you can maneuver around the dips, the valleys, and the
I think it makes sense too. I mean, if you're setting this long, lofty North Star goal without anything to measure against that in the short term and the midterm, how can you define what failure is, right?
Yep.
Yeah. One of the other questions, any questions here? No? Good? All right. One of the other ones is like, how do you find a balance? So I think there is a balance between testing and running up against what we measure, and then just trusting your gut and going after something and sticking something against the wall. How do you find balance in those?
I mean, I think it's realizing that you've got this destination in mind, right? Like there's this completeness of vision, there's the thing that you want to deliver ultimately, but the art of the startup, the art of building something from scratch is how do you deliver value, on that road in between. And, what you're aiming at is sort of like this, where you might end up is sort of like that, and you're just kind of going in that direction. And there's that component of vision, measuring what you're doing, and then at that level, like customer development, and listening to what your customer is willing to pay for, right? Because you have to survive along that path, even if you raise money, right? If you're bootstrapping, obviously, like you have to survive along that path. And so, are you delivering value incrementally along your path to completeness of vision?
So in my role today at Oregon Angel Fund, I talk to companies all day long. I talk to startups and talk to them about where they're at. And I think one of the biggest things is, everyone's going to here, right? But what are those incremental steps where you can get to a point, make some wins, raise your head up and say, okay, are we still on the right path? Or that didn't work. We have to change things. And, it's hard to tell sometimes what the goalposts ought to be. But
and even the decisions to get to the next one, like that is the art of doing it. That is literally the art of doing it.
Yeah, I think this is more of a question for some of the kind of first or early time entrepreneurs, whether that be their 55 or 15, is that you don't know what you don't know. So if you're starting off from this very point of naivety, like what is something that you think people should, the one piece of advice you think that they should hold on to? I'm sure you both have your own personal stories, but also I'm sure you've heard a lot of people making the same mistakes on this road to failure or success. Any stick out?
I think not, having that vision and not listening to customers is one that I see a lot of people saying, I'm doing this and we're going to do it like this because I wanted it that way. And that's great that you want it that way. It's a good first step, but then adjusting and being open to what your customers are saying and being very responsive to that and being very, very close to that is a mistake that I see in companies that I've talked to quite a bit. They're like, no, we're building this thing because we want it. Okay.
And I still see that. Talking to people, you still see teams getting started or individuals getting started investing their time in things that they haven't fully fleshed out. So that's the customer development side of it. And people underestimate how hard it is. Like if you're good at building product, it's a lot easier to build product than it is to go do marketing and get customers. But you have to, your product meets the market. You have to fulfill that side of the equation. And so the best time to stop and mitigate your risk and failure is like right now, right? Is it like before you invest time, money, your life, lose your, get divorced or whatever, right? Like the best time to stop is right now. It doesn't have to be that bleak, but the best time to stop is right now. And I think most people don't understand the full scope of like what they're committing to and maybe the sequencing of the steps.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think people are just so in love with their own idea or the idea of being an entrepreneur? Because this is something I feel strongly about, but this is your chance to talk about it.
I mean, I think you nailed it. And like John touched on it, it's people want to build to solve their own problems, right? Like they want to build for themselves, which is like awesome because they have like this clear vision. But you have to make sure that you're like ruthless about what you're focused on to get you there. Right. That, okay, great. If we build this, we know how the mechanics of building this, but how are we going to distribute it? How are we going to generate interest? How are we going to get people to sign up and buy it?
Yeah, I think it's that knowing, there's a romantic notion of the entrepreneur, right? And it's a really lot of hard work, and it's going to be 10 times harder than anyone thinks to get from zero to something. And I think that people read, they look at, you look at the show, you look at Silicon Valley, and you read the books, and it's like, oh, I need to stick to my vision and know what that is. And there's a certain amount of that, and then there's a certain amount of reality, and you have to balance those two things together on a constant basis.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it keeps coming back to this idea of making assumptions, measuring against them, and then having a feedback loop and following it. I mean, this doesn't sound like rocket surgery. It sounds pretty straightforward. So why do you think people are not figuring this out? Why do you think failure is so rampant? Because I see the aftermath of it all the time. Entrepreneurs coming to me after they've already made the mistake and saying, hey, would you grab coffee? And I'm like, so you burned through all your family and friends' money. You burned through all your relationships. That guy who built you the core of the product is gone now. And now you want help. I think
it's because one is why does it fail? We're building the very definition of what's new, right? So anybody doing this is doing it at some level for the first time, right? It's a new team, it's a new product. You've got you're differentiated, you're a unique value proposition, right? Like you're building something inherently new, and there is not a perfect roadmap to doing that. There's a lot of good ideas. There are a lot of good ideas, but nobody's going to face the challenges that you're facing at the moment that you're facing them.
Yeah. And there's 100 variables, right? I mean, there's your personal variables with your family and your lifestyle and everything, and then there's add a partner, and now that's 10x the number, and it just exponentially. And then you have the market and the product and the customers, and it's just there's failure because it's hard, and there's a lot of different. When I started free range, my very first investor was a friend of ours and who was my CEO for many years. We got to about $50,000 in revenue. And I said, I worked for you when you started the company. You had $300,000 in revenue. I was like the fifth person working for him. I saw what it was like to go from $300,000 to $20 million. But you didn't tell me about this first part, to get from 0 to 50. And he goes, if I told you, you wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's be discerning about who you work with. A lot of failure is caused also by just crazy team dynamics, right? Where people think they have a need or a specific role to fill, they go out and fill it. They fill it too early. They fill it with the wrong person, and they make a compromise. And the team that you're putting together. I mean, even if that's just you and your co-founder, you and another person, more than if it's you plus anybody else, it's the makeup of that team is what's going to drive is the engine that drives it forward.
Wow, sounds like the base state is failure, and then you're trying to build some group of people to overcome that, and then you're constantly falling back down to that base level, over and over and over.
Hope you're not falling down to the level. You're just, it's
falling back down.
2 steps forward, 1 step back, right?
Yeah.
That
makes sense.
The way it's a long time to get things going and get everyone working together and get customers to understand. If you're going after something that's completely new, if you're going after something that everyone understands, it's a different story.
There's probably not as big of an opportunity, but there's also probably not as big an opportunity to fail. So, yeah. Any questions? We're flying through these. Yes.
Kind of on John's last note, the idea that go from 0 to 50, and that's the hardest, right? To get to that first 50K. How do you know?
So you get to the next 50, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
Each step is hard.
When you need to apply more grit versus kind of reevaluating your strategy and going a different direction. And I guess this will also apply to crowd compass. You said like you're kind of creating the market yourself. Like how did you know that it was the right approach rather than like looking into markets and expanding the kind of product that you'd already built?
Do you want to repeat the question, or I can?
Yeah. Go ahead and repeat the question.
So grit, like how much do you bear down and keep going at what you're going after, or reassess and go after a new opportunity, a new market? Is that right? So how?
So I think it comes back to being really clear on what the objectives are, and again measuring like what success and what failure looks like. The reality though is sometimes you're in the middle, right? And it's not clear whether we double down or we pull back. And for us, I don't know. I mean, at Crowd Compass, it was like sheer determination. I mean, I had an investor say, "You sound like a smart guy. You should be doing something else." I was like, "Okay, well, we've got customers, and I'm pretty sure we can make this work." But I think it's hard. It's hard to assess that. I think it's make sure everybody's really clear and honest with themselves, right? And then you say out loud what isn't working, and you address what's not working, and you dig into the reasons behind why it's not working. Yeah.
We used to one of the things that we did was sort of have almost business sprints, just like you would with a tech sprint, and sort of 3 months or so, and you're like, this is our strategy, we're doing this for the next 3 months or until something else changes our mind, and we're 100% behind this right up until tomorrow. And then you pick up, look at it objectively, listen to what people are saying too. You'll get lots and lots of advice, right? And some of it's good and some of it's bad. But if you start listening to your customers and understanding what they want, you can start to figure out if you have to go further or if there's just not a there.
And it is also a balance, just to add on to that, it is also a balance of you still have to have a destination, like a larger destination. You can't be so myopic that the strategy is changing the strategy is radically changing every 6 months. I mean, I heard about a pretty significant company. I'm not going to talk about the name. It's not my company. But they, internally the strategy was changing like every 6 months, and it was like whiplash for the people, and they were investing in these sort of, longer term approaches to short term strategy that kind of are crushing defeats inside the company. Yeah.
So it's a balance between having that long distance North Star and then all the pieces to get there, and maybe adjusting it.
Yeah.
Great. You had a question?
Yeah, you mentioned the dynamic working with you guys are growing your company. What are the steps you guys establish the core?
So the question was, how do you build a company, its culture, but also to help define roles as they reflect on culture, I think. Close. I try.
Yeah, so I'll take it. So for me, it was really important starting notion that we addressed the things that we fell short with, in my last company, and we document a ton of stuff, right? Because we recognize how hard it is for a new person to come into the organization and get ramped up, and all that like tribal knowledge that you bake into everything. It's just like tech debt, right? It erodes at what you're ultimately trying to accomplish. And so we're trying to do a good job balancing, like moving fast as a small team, but recognizing that, hey, it's pretty important to document the what we believe and how we go about things, like those two components. And I don't know, Julianne's seen our like crazy 70-page plus playbook. And yeah, so I mean that's how we approach it. I think it's really important to think about what that looks like, and then at each stage, we're thinking about, okay, so we're doing this today. What does this look like when we're 50 people? Today we're only 8 people. We're hiring, by the way, but we're only 8 people, and what does this look like when we're 50 people or 25 people? What does it look like when we're 100? What adjustments are we planning that we have to make, just so we're all aware of that?
I think at the really early stage, when it's just a couple of people having the right I think partners are really important. It helped drive everything. So we would meet once a week, and while we were just getting the ideas going, you felt obligated to all your partners to make sure, and it's that trial by fire that helps create a culture and a mythology about a company inside, and that's really important. As you grow, I don't know, I think one of the things was just get really smart people, they'll figure things out, and then set up internal tensions, like intentional tensions between parts of the organization where there should be a tension. And if they're all really smart and respectful and understand what they can learn from each other, that drives everyone to be better. And it sets up this nice kind of collaborative yet competitive culture that helps drive things forward.
Yeah, different points of view. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. A healthy set of creative tension versus a dysfunctional set of tension.
The dysfunctional one's usually ego-driven. There's somebody who isn't being respectful of the other side. Like my stuff is more important than their stuff, right? And some of those would be like, we'd have a services part of the business and you have a product part of the business that's driving, and they have to work together. You have the people that are running the back end systems, and then the people that are talking to the customers. Well, they all have to be on the same page, and if you have someone who thinks, well, my section's more important and we need to be doing this and you guys are idiots for thinking this, well, then you have a problem, and it's a personal problem, right? If everything else is good, it's that person that is not fitting in, and they're not, maybe it's not they're a bad person, it's just that they might not be right for a startup.
Yeah, I would second that. It's definitely, you need everybody on the same page and understand we're all like working to this collective thing, right? Like we're all working together. We can have different opinions and different, opinions on how to get there, but you have to understand that everybody's intention and motivation is to get there, right?
I think it's also leading as the leader of the company, keeping that, making sure everybody knows what the vision is and what the strategy is, and if it changes, getting that communication. It's easy to think that everyone knows where you're going. And my daughter came to work one day with me and sat there, and she said, "Dad, all you do all day long is you go to meetings, you drink coffee, you go like this a lot, and you repeat yourself." And I was like, pretty much what I do all day long. And, wow.
How old was she?
Yeah.
Future manager, for sure. You, sir? Hi, Mark. I'm Tyler. Robert.
You know what?
I'll mark you down as Robert. What's your question?
Well, I just want to kind of propose something that's a little different than what you said, because my experience with a growing business, I work in consulting, so my experience with a growing business is that as businesses get bigger, people who can kind of get you the growth are not necessarily the same people that can sustain it. There are builders and there are sustainers, really good and all that. But I think about culture. Think about the word transparency, about breaking down silos. And I guess what they mentioned here is using metrics that are very transparent and goals for people that are very kind of discussed in different silos, so that people can see each other struggle in a kind of a structured way. So you know what I mean? Like if somebody's not hitting their sales targets or their development but if they're trying to hit some very specific, measurable, controllable things, and there's discussion about it, that creates that culture of need and helpfulness that a less structured approach kind of is the ego issue.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So there's no question to repeat, but I think it's a good comment.
I think there's different stages of the company. I guess I'm talking about the early stage, like you're between 0 and 15 people, and yeah, you get to a point where you need to replace. You need people that know how to do things, and that's a change in the company, and it has to be very intentional. I think you're right.
The specialized versus generalized roles, and I think that a lot of people end up either fitting in or moving on kind of naturally if they know that that's required. That's my own thought. I do think it's transparency, though, that helps dictate what those roles are.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm building the company that I'm building, right? As we grew up, so we were, obviously me in my apartment, and then 25 plus people, and then 75 people, and then 150 people, plus in this, inside of a larger organization after I sold the company. And it was growing that you realized if you don't have everybody focused on those metrics, then people aren't gunning towards the same mission, right? And if they're not gunning towards the same mission, they're drifting, and then you get this sort of, dilution of culture.
There's one right here. You? So how do you resolve someone who wants to release early and often and someone who wants to release to polish good? Is that the question? That's a very specific one.
I mean, I like that question. I mean, we face it a lot.
Yeah.
And
it's like the engineer-salesman dynamic.
Yeah, thankfully, we have very, very talented engineers that work with us that are always proposing and communicating, hey, we can take on more tech debt, or we can, because that's really like the dimension that we're talking about, like delivering value to the customer versus, taking on tech debt. The sooner that you can ship something and get customer feedback, the more correct you're going to be. I mean, that's just fundamentally, that's it. And the game is to not take on so much tech debt that you die later.
And I mean, if you release early and that no one likes it, then very few people saw it, so you're not really worried about.
That's right. Like, there is definitely premature optimization, which I have been massively guilty of in the past.
I mean, unless you're going out there and throwing behind a bunch of money behind marketing,
sure,
failure is not heard, really, for the most part.
I think I see that a lot in companies that we look at, where it's like, we're going to build this thing and we have a vision for it, and it's 6 months till we have it. Great. How many customers have you talked to about whether or not when you get there, they're going to want to buy what you're building? And it's a balance, but if you're constantly getting that cycle going, where we're talking to customers early, we're understanding what they're doing, then you can get that balance.
You've got to ship, because even if the customers say something, you'll hear that they want it, right? I mean, you might hear that they want it, and then it's like, oh, in 6 months we'll deliver this thing, and everybody will beat down our doors to buy it. But there's so much, there's a lot more to it.
And how frequently do you think that actually happens?
But where they just beat down your door, not very often.
But what is the most? I think failure is pretty more frequent compared to that, right?
Yes, failure is more frequent. But shipping mitigates that, right? Yeah, shipping is it will change your focus. You realize, hey, this thing that we just delivered, we have no idea how to distribute it. We have no idea how to drive people towards it. When people get there, they have no idea how to use it. So we've got to focus on onboarding. We've got to focus on, the activation pieces. They have to overcome that feature wall to even use the things that we're planning. And so if we had just built it, we would have missed all that. Mm-hmm. But it's about communication and making sure you've got that fluid communication with the team, and they understand, one, the decision, or who makes the decision, and then two, just, hey, can we take on that tech debt or not?
Yeah, go ahead. How do you prospect an opportunity?
Right. How do you evaluate the market and at what point?
Okay. How do you evaluate the market that you're potentially going after, and then how good does it have to be before you go after it?
Yeah, and at what stage
And what stage do you start doing that?
Before you start building.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if you're, and it's something that I see often again with companies coming in to talk to us, where it's like, yeah, we've started building this thing, and we haven't, we're waiting to show it to customers till we have something built. It's like, well, how about go talk to customers first a little bit, and figure out if this is a pain point for them, right? And what we really like to see is entrepreneurs that come out having a bit of that pain point, or know the industry they're going to sell back into and how to reach that industry, and know some of those companies, or know some of those the features that they need to put into it before they start building anything, and then you know where you're going.
Can people in the back hear John? Is there any? Okay, just making sure. Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, we started really early. We started like a year and a half before we built like the product, and it went from the whole iteration of, hey, let's have a conversation. So lining up people to have a conversation, and that turned into focusing like scripted interviews. So like we dialed in the questions, like very specific things that we wanted to learn about and understand, and then that led to high fidelity mock-ups like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, like something that kind of looked like it worked, right? That people could react to, and then we got to a place where we're comfortable ourselves, because we're investing obviously a lot of time and money, personal time and money into it to go after it. But then, and in the backdrop of all that, that's like product stuff. But the backdrop of all that is, what kind of company do you want to build? Do you understand the market dynamics, right? Are you creating like an entirely new market? Are you resegmenting an existing market, right? Are you just improving something that's already there? Like Kayak or Hitmonk or something like that. That was an improvement of what's already there. Airbnb is probably like a new market opportunity. Right. So you understand the dynamics of the space that you're even playing in, and how are you going to fund it? Are you going to bootstrap it? Are you going to raise money? Like all the criteria around that.
Go ahead.
How much like competition? It's like I've had visions for companies, and I'll look at the market and go, well, so I'm thinking I should join them.
So how much competition in a market would prevent you from going into it? That's the question?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
I think there's opportunity kind of everywhere. And it's just, is the market big enough? And those people competing in the market probably have a weak spot. Mm-hmm. And can you exploit that weak spot? And what are your expectations for the company on top of that? What I wouldn't do, what I think is interesting is, after like growing Crowd Compass, the one lesson that I took away is like, hey, I wouldn't come into a market that's being defined. Like, don't compete in a market where the market is figuring itself out, because that's like a really tricky situation, because the people you're competing with are trying to figure it out too. They don't have it like dialed in, so you can't like laser focus in on them and
they're doing this,
and destroy
we're doing
them.
that.
Exactly. So
Gotcha.
There's like a ton of education that's happening in the market, and so if someone has a lead there, it's just messy, right? So like, don't go into, if you would try.
You're being too early. You hear that all the time.
It's like you're like year 2, 3, 4 of Airbnb.
Yeah.
When they're trying to like educate, hey, like rent out your house and all that other stuff, right? Like, don't try to go compete with them on that, right? They've raised money. They're like way ahead of you. They've got like a year or 2 years on you. It's like a very hard, messy space to go compete at that time. Go compete like now, when they've got loud, people are upset and whatever. So.
Right.
Did you have a response?
I was thinking it goes back to your first question of like, where's the customer? I mean, I think it's like, do the customers of the existing competitors have a problem, right? Do they not like something about the product that you can do better? And if not, then why compete against them?
And the bigger it is and the more mature the company is in the market, the less they're able to go after that one small thing.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of hands, so I'm going to try to get one on this side now. Yeah?
My name is Doc. John, Dave, can you share a little bit about when you first initially launched your product, what thoughts around have some interest there? It's more important to give it away for free to get a reference, or is it more of a sharing revenue thing, or is it discount price?
So to shrink it down, how do you price your product, and how do you decide the pricing engine and all those things?
I'm not going to add $20 was my answer, and so that was wrong. So
It's hard. I mean, it's really hard.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stuff written about pricing exercises and things like that. It should be indexed. Don't put artificial constraints on things that customers value, right? Like don't charge, per gigabyte stored if customers value X widgets or whatever, right? Like try to align what you're charging for with the delivered customer value. It depends on your business. It depends on like what model you're trying to drive. Is it a consumer model? Is it a B2B model? How you're selling it? There's so many factors.
There's also the question of price sensitivity. If they're willing to pay 3 times as much,
yeah,
don't undersell yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Like try not to leave stuff on the table. Like the rule of thumb that I heard is, when 15 to 20% of your people, like the prospects that you're talking with, object that it's too expensive, then you priced it accurately for that market. Right, so you should have people objecting. Like people shouldn't be like, "Yeah, great, like here's my credit card. That seems really like a great deal." So if there's definitely products that I bought where I'm like, "Wow, they could charge me a lot more money." Yeah. Evernote.
They're working on it.
I know. They just converted me after 10 years of not. So yeah.
In the back. So how do you find your group of alpha testers or people that you ask questions to or survey or that? So how do you find people to take a look at what you're building? Who should you find for that?
Before you build anything, you should have that hypothesis. So it's just like it's an experiment. I want to attract CEOs of companies that have less than 500 people or whatever, right? And then you have to have some hypothesis of who's going to use your product. You talk about desire paths. Intercom has published a bunch of Intercom, the company, has published a bunch of stuff on jobs to be done, which I think aligns probably with what you're talking about. Like, what are people trying to accomplish? They're trying to solve that job to be done, right? This package of things that they want to accomplish. And so who are those people, right? And just like deeply think about like who are those people, who might they be, and then just straight up reach out to them.
Yeah. Pick up the phone. Yeah. If you think you're selling to gas stations, pick up the phone and start calling gas stations. Say, hey, or walk in and say, hey, I'm selling this thing. You don't have to have it, but start selling it. There's a company I talked to recently was making a product for the wine industry, very, very high-end product for the wine industry, and trying to figure out if anybody would buy it. And I said, why don't you put an ad in Wine Spectator and see who responds.
I mean, if nobody's willing to talk to you, then they probably don't want your product. If people are willing to talk, yeah, I mean, if you're talking to the right audience and you're touching on a pain point, they'll talk to you for sure. Yeah.
Back middle. Jake.
You're talking about growth, especially at scale, and kind of related to Robert's question. And assuming the law of 3s and 9s, where everything breaks at 3 and 9, you guys recount a story where things have broken, where your processes have had to kind of rebuild that, and then again and again and again. I think that's kind of part of the failure process.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a story of when things broke, mainly the process, and kind of how you overcame it. Right? It's close?
Yeah, based on 3s and 9s.
Based on 3s and 9s.
Yeah.
Or 12s.
Or it's the law of 3s and 9s, right?
Yeah.
For me, it was running Crowd Compass. We had scaled up the product. The product was at like a fairly intensive state for customer onboarding, like customer success, and we had to scale up our customer service team to make sure that customers could like accomplish what we wanted them to accomplish, and the wheels like totally came off. I mean, we had automated a bunch of pieces, like independent pieces, to help accomplish, build mobile apps. It was a mobile app company, and but like, oh my God, like we had people up all night, team members like up all night helping people all around the world,
Wow.
in like super stressful environment, and all the process around that completely broke. How like literally it's just how we're managing, like tickets, and we went from doing stuff on, physically on the wall in the office with Post-it notes to Trello to like other software, and just trying to find like just a process that worked for us. Again, it comes back to like we're doing this for the first time, and there's not a lot of people that are experiencing like our exact problem. And so yeah, it was a really painful time for everybody involved. But it was definitely like that scaling point. And then we got past that. Like I ended up running customer success for like 6 months. We staffed up and all this other stuff. We got past that. We automated more things. The product team jumped in and we built stuff. Got past that, and then our infrastructure melted down. Then we had, so many users and people using the product, which is a great problem to have, that we literally like had the infrastructure completely on fire all the time. And so, yeah, we started addressing that.
Is that something you can plan for?
We could have done a better job planning for it. Yeah. We could have done a better job planning for it.
But when you're running fast, it's hard to plan.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to take that checkpoint. It doesn't have to because we could have planned for it months before, right? By looking at the trajectory, looking at our goals, and saying we want to be at 1,000 customers a month or whatever, right? That were like active users, and we could have mapped out like, oh, that'll mean X on the infrastructure side. Guess what? We don't have anybody to run that, and so we need to hire 3 months ago, and then
Sounds like the struggle that you both keep coming back to is that balance between I only have so much time and I have so much effort and I got to put out these two fires and then I got to spend time to plan. And it's a balance between over planning and over architecting for success and looking for those and just dealing with it as it comes. So, I mean, do you have any feedback on that?
There was not. I mean, we were also doing mobile apps at the same time, or probably we were a little earlier than you guys. And it was exactly 9 customers we got, and every one of them was basically custom built. And then it's like, no, we got to have a system for this.
Wow.
And now you get a system, and then we ran that until we had about 350 titles, and then Apple changed the iOS and changed some of the rules, and now you have to redo every one of those apps. And oh, by the way, the sales team sold special things here and there, and that's another area where the wheels came off. So.
Wow. There's one over here. Yeah, you?
Yeah, so there's a story about Fred Smith when he started FedEx. He actually did it at the business plan as his MBA, and he got a D on it. He went on and started FedEx anyways. So, John, what is something that you passed on that you regret?
John, what's an investment that you passed on, knowing that there is a reporter in the room?
Well, yeah, I don't actually have enough experience yet at O.
Oh, good answer.
I haven't been here long enough.
Hedge. Come on.
No, I haven't seen any yet that we passed on that we were like, oh, yeah, we should have done that.
You won't know that for a little bit.
We won't know that for another couple of years, right? Because it takes a long
point.
time. So, so I don't think I have one yet.
Any good ideas that you have not done? You don't have to tell us about well, maybe.
I always have good ideas.
Yeah?
I don't know. I mean, it's like
good ideas.
Ideas are cheap, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the people are like, oh, I'm super secretive about my idea. Nobody cares. It's so much harder to drive it across the finish line.
Or like he mentioned before, is if someone else is already addressing it in a good way, why not help them? Why not get behind them? Why not be number 2 in a market or number 2 on a team? Yeah. I feel like one of the points of failure that I see come up a lot is people talking about how they feel like they're alone and all those kinds of things. And so one of the questions in here by Teresa is, what is the essential team you should surround yourself with? And I'm guessing that she's talking about really, really early stage people. And I don't know if this is necessarily roles, but maybe it's more archetypes, like the type of people. So any suggestions or any things that you need to make sure that we do have on our founder teams?
The founder team was one part, right? So I actually, my business partner was, I met him he was interviewing at 2 companies that I used to work at, and the CEO of one of them called me and said, "Hey, could you help him make the right decision?" And so I got to know him a little bit over the course of the thing. And when he finally did take a job, I called him and said, "You know what? Congratulations on your new job. I'm really disappointed because I think we should do something together." And he just was a hard worker. I took him out. We drank beer. I did a lot of my hand thing, laid out the whole vision for him. And a week later, he came back with a prototype. And I said, good business partner.
Wow.
And so that was the founding team. The first hire we made was Megan works here, but she's not here. I don't think she works in this building. But I hired her because she was a lot like me, and I needed someone to just take stuff and own it. And I literally walked in and I said, the first day, I said, "Great, so we just signed the Wall Street Journal. We need to make this app for them and get it all done." And she's like, "Okay." I said, "Great, because I got to go to this other meeting. That's your job." And she took it and ran with it and made it happen. And then the next person that we hired was the exact opposite, and very intentionally. I got someone who was systems. I'm not systems. Who was like saying, "Hang on, how are we going to do this in a way that's repeatable? How are we going to make things happen?" So really trying to get the balance of, for me personally, like what's going to make my life easier by people that are good at the things that I'm not good at.
I definitely think you can be strategic about it. You can think about what are the biggest challenges we're going to face in the next, 6 months, 12 months. How are we going to fund it? Who can we hire? The hiring plan, and out of that will shake at least your initial take on who that's going to be. But it is archetypes. Like you're fulfilling so many different roles that you need. Who's going to talk to customers? Who's going to be able to parse like product feedback into something and translate that into requirements? Who's going to be the systems thinker? Who's going to help lead the team? Like who's the culture carrier, right? That rallies everybody to go go out and have a beer and get closer. Like those different elements, and then as you grow up, like how do people specialize, right? And where do you fill in the other needs? Because that problem doesn't go away.
Yeah. As someone else said, as you grow, you start specializing. So if you had to specialize, what would be your individual specialties? If you had to pick one, hand waving. This. Okay.
In the direction. I mean, that's kind of where. I mean, my specialty was getting everybody rallied on towards one thing, and doing the repeating that got everybody going in the same direction. Gotcha. That was definitely and then understanding the customer needs and being able to translate that back to the engineering team so they could build products. Sort of that kind of product management strategy side.
Wow.
It's strategy. It's like thinking about getting to a place where you can map out what do the next 3 to 5 years look like, right? Yeah. The team's got the near term 12 to 24 months, but what does the whole market look like 3 to 5 years? Because that defines, are you going to survive long term, right? Like what's the long term trajectory of the company?
Awesome. And good people let you guys focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There was another question. There's a bunch of questions. Yes, you.
The question is, in terms of what you're learning, you're running the business and getting knowledge, getting wisdom. Here's my question is, what are some of your habits, daily, monthly, some of your habits around storage of that knowledge, sharing of that wisdom?
So what are your daily or regular habits that you use to share the knowledge you're building? Is that right? That you're learning along the way? Probably especially for people who have just joined, which you touched on briefly, but yeah, how are you going about doing that on a daily basis?
So for us, there's a couple things that I think are interesting. We moved from we do stand-ups as a company, so we like everybody participates in stand-up. I mean, we're a small company, so 8 people, but we're doing it in Slack, so it's all written down, and so it creates a little bit of that record, kind of like on a week-to-week basis, and I think that's a lot better than. So
you type it, or you just, or you stand there and do it?
No,
oh, okay.
We don't. We could all stand up and type. Yeah, no, yeah. So we write it down, and then we're a little bit like haphazard. My co-founder does actually a better job. He's a more systems thinker, systems process person. He sends out like the internal kind of weekly roundup of like, here's the major things that we accomplished or did this week and what we stopped doing this week. But we focus our energies into that so that people are up to speed. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the writing things down, and then me personally, it's planning out what the next day looks like, what the upcoming. It's part of like the like stand-up sprint process. It's like, what does the next week look like? You've got your quarterly objectives, you have your like ultimate goals, but what are we doing this next week, and how am I breaking that up into actionable items to accomplish that? Like writing that stuff down helps keep you on track.
Yeah,
that's probably the biggest thing that I've been a lot better about and learned is just to really like focus, write it down, and then tackle those things. John?
Yeah, we were pretty informal about it all, and it was a lot of. We all worked in one big. We had 2 rooms, one big room where everyone sat, and then we had a conference room that was also my office when I needed an office, and so I got to hear every meeting that went on, and there was a lot of sharing that went on through that, and
it's good and bad.
It's good and bad, yes. Yeah. Well,
one person will come in and start talking, and then suddenly you've got the entire team having a conversation about something that you're like,
do you know what's going on, though?
Yeah, you know what's going on.
Yeah, it's hard. I think it is that constant communication, and it's the transparency too. It's recognizing, celebrating your wins and recognizing your failures, and that's one thing I was never good at is celebrating the wins. I just wasn't. You're like, okay, great. So what? We're on to the next thing. That was good. Good job.
I expected that.
But I think keeping that, being really transparent about things and making sure that everybody knows that we're all on the same team.
Yes, you, sir.
In any of your companies, at what point did branding become more issue?
Branding. When did it become important, if at all?
It was always important to me, even though it took us like 2 years to get it figured out. It was important to me. We just hadn't prioritized it. And honestly, it was a function of money, too. It was like, hey, we've got to spend money to get this dialed in. And then my co-founder is really strong on that side. So this time around with Notion, it's a core component of what we're doing.
It's important for what you're doing now because your branding is much more important now than it was before. But the same as we were in the same boat before, whereas we were both back end doing white label solutions for other people. Our brand was not important at all, and so.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you are doing white label solutions. Since you are a small company, how did you even find the first customer? They would say you are so small. We are Wall Street Journal. Why should I give my app for you to build?
So how did you, when you were so small, attract and get a big customer? An example that she pulled up was Wall Street Journal.
Yeah. So I went and visited them and said, hey, we have this great thing. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's nice. And I went and visited them again and said, we had a great thing. And they said, yeah, that's nice. And then I said, let's build one. And so I walked in with the Wall Street Journal app on my BlackBerry that we built for them. And I said, hey, and they're like, oh, that's what you're doing? It's like, yeah, that's what we've been telling you every time. And I got a champion who was a junior. He was a product manager. He was not one of the vice presidents there. And so the next time I walked in, I was ready to be like, okay, what is it going to take for us to make this happen? And I sit down, and the first thing he says to me is like, okay, what's it going to take for us to get this done? And I'm like, well, let's see what we can do. And so it just took persistence, showing them exactly what it was, and then finding the right champion.
So show, don't tell.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And you're solving, he solved, that product manager probably was tasked with building something like that or delivering something like that. So like you're solving the pain.
He was willing to go out on a limb. He didn't, they at the time, they didn't even think about it as a problem to solve. He did, because he was a younger guy. He's like, mobile's coming, everyone's going to have smartphones someday, whatever those are. And he was like, yeah, we can do this. And it made his career as well, because he by doing that, he got out in front, and people were like, oh, wow, you're pretty visionary in this.
The thing that I would caution is really hard. So I think of it as like gears, right? Like gears meshing. It's really hard for a small startup to interface with a large enterprise. Like that is like, the graveyard of startups is littered with companies that thought like, oh, I've got this amazing contract around the corner. If I could just get them to sign, and it's like they're moving at a different speed than you are, and they have a bunch of different requirements. Like there's relationship building in individuals. Like the individual you might be interfacing with, probably really excited about what you're selling, and they probably even need it, but what's behind that yes is all kinds of stuff that you don't even realize is going to swamp you. And if moving fast and learning is really the objective, and that's the key to survival, how are you going to do that inside of this like tangled web of big company?
So it sounds like be careful of the customer that you're going after.
Yeah.
Because you might just succeed.
You might get them.
That's right. That's right.
Great. You, sir?
Oh, just as a
Oh.
quick comment,
You again? Okay.
was that, CEO I talked to once, he says, never go after a customer you don't want to work for.
So you ever go after a customer you wouldn't want to work for?
Yeah, I've had some of those customers.
Yeah. Yes, you.
Hi, I'm Erin. So you talked a little bit about employees and the first hires around employees, but before you're even at that stage, you're at the founder stage. And I'm just curious, how do you attract the people that you need in order to do business? Like, your accountant without any money, without putting them like on a path of the in order to get them to help you out.
How do you attract people that you need early on? Is that the question? Okay.
I mean, the professional services type people. Well, there's great organizations like TAO and OEM that have. There's certain people that are in those industries that like working with startups. They know that you have nothing, and they're fine with it, making the bet on the future, right? And so, you just got to find the right ones. If you get the wrong ones, then they don't quite understand that, and they're going to send you the giant bills. And so I think what is great about Oregon is that we've got this really nice entrepreneurial system already set up where it's easy to find those people. And ask all your friends that are doing startups too, because they know the good ones. So,
Dave?
Yeah, do your research. Like it's really hard. I mean, it's hard to know. It's hard to know even how to assess, right? Because you have some skill set. Like you might have a really strong business skill set, or you might have a really strong like technical skill set. It's just generally hard to assess how good these people are that you're potentially working with, and then obviously selecting from a pool of people that don't necessarily want top dollar. Do your homework. It's worth doing the homework, but it's also again like natural tension of like don't prematurely optimize. Kind of you can fix a bunch of mistakes downstream. Just be aware of like that tech debt, like that debt that you're taking on, right? Like if you did a quickie job on like incorporating or something like that, just make sure that you build in time to address it, because the easiest time to actually deal with it is up front, but there could be obviously reasons why you would choose not to.
And I would say one of the key things is to have friends that have been through it a bunch of times and that you can talk to. If that's the first thing you do is talk to customers and talk to other people who are entrepreneurs, be their friend, then you're getting a lot of really free advice. I've gotten a mountain of free work and free advice for my 2 failures. Working on my 3rd now. Wish me luck. But yeah, and I mean, I think that's it. It's if you can grab, like some people are extremely busy. You can find folks that are just maybe 2 steps ahead of you instead of 5, and get to know those folks really well, and then you can go along up with them. They'll make the mistakes right before you, so you can maybe step aside them and make your own mistakes. So.
Also, like when you have absolutely kind of like no money, focus on the really smart people that are junior, right? That are willing to like hustle and try to like they've got their own agenda, like they want to build, a portfolio, they want to make their name, they want to participate and interact with like fast growing companies.
They're trying to leave their job and they've got pay.
Yeah.
Or they're still living at their mom's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally.
And that's not a joke. That's for real.
Yeah.
Any others? So you had mentioned a couple things, just to step aside. And so one of the questions here is, what is essential team members? You had mentioned that, but would you say there's essential non-team members that you should surround yourself with? You were mentioning this earlier, John.
well, I think having good advisors is really important, because I think about one of the things that was hard when we were starting, and probably where I made a bunch of mistakes, is you're moving fast, you got your head down, and you need people who sort of are outside of that, who are just watching and can ask you good questions. And so I think getting people who have done your type of business before, understand your customers, have done startups before, really helps a lot in helping you sidestep some of those mistakes so you can make your own.
And just consider the source, right? Like consider like where their strengths come from, and make sure that you're getting advice that's aligned with their strengths and not just their. I mean, just consider the source.
Grain of salt. That's.
I mean, you're going to get a lot of advice, right?
Yeah.
You're going to get a lot of advice. Just understand how to parse it.
And your job, even if they're your board members, when we went to sell the company, we got an offer, and I said, well, maybe I should go back to the Wall Street Journal and see if they want to buy us. And we got the advice from someone said, don't do that. You could mess up the deal if you do that. Definitely don't want to do that. And I went and did it anyway because and fortunately the chairman of my board said, yeah, that's your job. Your job is to do the right thing by the company. You listen to all the advice, decide what you're going to do, and it's on you anyway. So it's you can listen to what everybody says, but at the end of the day, it's up to you.
Yes.
A lot of the earlier conversations seem to be kind of oriented around like MVP, like minimal viable product dynamics. Concept I found very valuable is MDP, like minimal delightful product. And I'm curious to hear like, Brandon, you have decided to like stop putting out fires and instead focus on making sure there's a minimal delightful experience. If there's any examples.
So, minimum delightful products. Have you guys gone down that road? Have you made decisions regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, so like at Crowd Compass, I think we lost like focus on that kind of too late. And so there was a bunch of stuff to go back and try to address and understand like what does activation look like and things like that. I think having a clear understanding of that is really, really important because it goes back to, are your customers successful when they buy your product? You can get people to buy it, right? Like you can go hustle and go sell it. You can go sell it at different levels in the organization. Like you can be very good at that. But if they don't extract the value that they want out of your product, they're going to churn. And that goes back to that company I mentioned where they kept changing strategy. They spent millions of dollars to acquire millions of dollars in business that then churned like 12 months later. That is almost worse than not getting the business at all because that's a problem put off, downstream, and it's like crushing if you don't know that that's coming. And so. Yeah, I mean, it's how do you deliver that delightful experience? How do you make your customer successful? How do you deliver that success state along that path, right, to your kind of completeness of vision?
We just did Julianne put together a SaaS workshop for Oregon Angel Fund recently where we got a bunch of different companies to come in and talk to us and a couple of VCs that have really focused on SaaS companies. And it's interesting because they were talking about early stage metrics. And we think, you think about like, okay, revenue, number of customers, active users, and one of the guys commented like, yeah, actually it's engagement. That's all that matters is engagement. It's like how deep do they go in the product? How much do they come back to the product? How delighted are they with the experience that they're doing? And if you can find those spots where they're not, you can actually make the product better. Like that's the most important thing to focus on at the early stage. And if you're doing a SaaS company, you're not necessarily talking to all the customers. You can watch what they're doing instead.
And it goes, and you can apply that same process to your marketing, right? Like an understanding how you're putting people into the funnel and like how they're converting. Like that's basically the same process as well. You can think of it as product, just another extension of product.
Good. Anybody? Okay, I'm going to start throwing extra ones in there. Unless you guys have anything specifically you wanted to talk about. I feel like when I talk with each of you individually, you get on a tangent and start railing at some specific stuff. Anything you want to rail against? Well, one of the ones that comes up, you're not jumping in. You're leaving me to hang out to dry. This is your panel. I'm just here supposed to moderate it. So you've also had some amount of failure, which I think we're now talking about that's just the baseline. Trying to get back from that, trying to overcome it. So what is one of the bigger things that you wish you would have done specifically different in a failure that you had?
For me, so like I started a company. I don't even talk about this. So I started a company. I was working for a company in Denver. I had done 2 startups in San Francisco, worked at them. And also, by the way, like working for bad companies is just as enlightening as working for good companies. Actually, probably more enlightening on what not to do. And it was before I worked for a company in Chicago that was both good and bad. And I started a company and did the classic mistake of like no customer development. Like we were very little customer development. I did a really good job selling it and a really good job building it and like all the mechanics of getting it sort of ready into market to the point where I could test it. But I spent, like 5 figures of my own money, and I didn't have that much money at the time to test this thing when I could have like spent an afternoon and $0, basically, right? I could have done some of the work to get connections and things like that, and I could have figured out what not to do in seriously like an afternoon, and it would have totally changed my perspective. And I've talked to people, I've talked to friends that have started companies where they're building an app or whatever, and they have no plan for distribution. It's just like a cringe because it's like you've got to figure out how you're going to deliver the thing in parallel with how you're going to build it, right? You have to figure that out, and time is precious, and so why spend time on something that nobody's going to use?
Mm-hmm. And I think, what you're saying is overall strategy, having a good strategy, and I think that was a failure that we had. Was you get in the weeds, you're adding customers, you got to make those customers happy, you're going, and not having enough advisors, not lifting your head up enough to listen to what those people are saying and stop and think. And I think, had we had a little more focus on the strategy, we would have gone down a different path in some ways, and I gotten more successful. We would have gotten to a higher level of success quickly.
Gotcha. So you think that you guys were that role of the person that was able to step back, and that helped you guys
to
succeed?
A limited sense, but that's you're running a company and you've got 25 people and you've got all these customers. It's hard to stop and step back and have the perspective that you need. I would have had more, I think having more advisors that I would have had more engaged would have been more useful to me.
So that was the next question, is like, what would have changed it? So you're thinking of outside advisors, people who removed, people could look at it objectively, would help prevent some of those failures or struggles? Yeah,
I think that having the discipline to have to talk to somebody outside every 2 weeks to say, yeah, this is what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and have them say, well, that's interesting, what about this? And I don't know, I hadn't thought about that. Would have helped us to hone in our course a little bit tighter.
That makes sense. So a follow-up question from me, since no one else is raising their hand. I'm still looking, if you raise your hand, is how do you go about give someone an executable leaving here if they really think that that's something that's valuable? How do you go about defining the types and the individuals that you need on your advisory board or just as friends? And then how do you go about getting those folks engaged with you? Any suggestions?
Map out what you need. I think fundamentally you know what you need. If you have any idea of like what you're trying to accomplish, you know what you need. What are your strengths? And be honest, and like, what are your weaknesses, and what do you need out of whatever you're building, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you need deep marketing experience in this area? Do you need deep product experience or technical experience? Like, and then start making lists of people that would be great. Kind of like blue sky lists, right? Oh, I want the CEO of Dropbox or like whatever, right? Whatever it is, and then do your best to like go after the people that you want. And surprise yourself, right?
Yeah.
Or fail, and like as you kind of negotiate and try to go along that path to find the people that you're targeting, you'll probably find other people, right?
So you think the effort of going after those specific people might bring other folks that are very, very similar?
You'll have to meet 5 people or 3 people to get in front of the one person you want, and a lot of those people are probably pretty excellent people, and you'll be surprised.
I'm terrible at B2C marketing. Yeah. I'm trying to find someone, here's the exact person I'm aiming at, and then you'll find a lot that hit near the bullseye.
Yeah, you can reach out directly. A lot of people like founder to founder or whatever.
Yeah.
People are busy, but you can, if you're persistent, right? Yeah. Persistence like matters. Be persistent.
Yeah, I think I think there's the customer specific or industry specific types of advisors, and then there's people who have gone through the exact experience of growing a company from 0 to whatever, and if you can get somebody like that you have a good rapport to, that trusts you and that you trust them, that's worth a lot. It's part of what I end up trying to do is put companies coming to us, whether we're going to invest in them or not, together with some of our investors who have all started companies or all run companies.
Yeah, I would say from my personal experience, not having a big blue chip on my shoulder, just email and then email again, and then say, hey, did you get my email? And then run into them at the coffee shop that they go to, and they don't find it, honestly. Like I've emailed you guys on the same chain a couple of times, and they're not offended by it. No one's offended by it. They're just crazy busy. When they wake up in the morning, especially if you're running a bigger company, the house is on fire, and they're picking 3 things to stomp out. And if you're not even up near the top 3, no offense, it's just the house is on fire, and you have a very insignificant problem. So
Just be genuine.
yeah.
Just be genuine and like, I don't know. I value persistence, right? Like I value people following up. I look for it in employees, right? When someone's like, hey, I'm really interested in working for you, and then they don't follow up, you're like, well, how deep was your interest?
Yeah.
Right? The people it's like 2% of people follow up. It's crazy.
So from that point of you guys advising some folks, which I'm aware of, but I don't know how much everyone is. So one thing that I notice is that when you get advice from someone, when you take it, going and doing something with it and reporting back. It seems
nice.
like
That's nice. Closing the loop is nice.
Yeah.
Well, I also think trying to understand what the advice is.
Mm-hmm.
So there was recently an entrepreneur who commented that they had received advice from an investor to spend less time with customers. Yes, and so you think, and my question to that, and I don't know what the situation was, but my question to that is, okay, so was the advice to spend less time with customers, or was the advice for the price that you're charging, you spend too much time with customers? So you maybe need to charge, I just wonder what the advice actually was and what was heard, because oftentimes you have your own perspective on things and you're putting up a filter. And so understanding the advice and not just taking it at face value is what's really important, I think. So
in those cases, it's always good to have like a recap.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like say like, hey, I heard you say this, and then you'll get a correction.
Is that what you were saying?
You know?
Really?
I mean, that's...
Because if it doesn't make sense, it's probably not what they meant.
Typically, they'll just add on to it if it's correct.
Yeah.
Or make suggestions. Yes, you.
It's me. Can you hear me up there?
What? Almost gotcha.
So
I try.
I'm not hearing something tonight that I was kind of hoping that I'd hear.
Pull it out of them. I'll help you.
I'm trying. You have to help me pull it out.
Okay.
Pull it out of me. John almost got there a minute ago. Dave almost got there when he was talking about having to lay off. Mostly I'm hearing, I got that. They're all over it. Putting a happy face on failure. This is a social and psychological process. It can trash lives, including yours. You must have learned something about that around building a hearty life, processing failure effectively in the context of your organization so that you can learn from it and the organization can learn from it, not be conquered by it, and also not to wait until a failure is really, really, really bad before you say, okay, it failed, time to learn, make a change.
So how do you find out the failure early on, and how do you personally deal with it so that way the company and you survive? Is that?
Yeah, so you don't trash your life or do stuff that trashes other people's lives.
Yeah, because I think what I hear you saying is that you heard we laid off people and then it was great, but yeah.
Acknowledge it was really a difficult thing. I actually just helped lay off a whole bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a really awful thing.
Yeah.
Especially when things are finally starting to go good, but then oops, no more. And John, a minute ago, kind of got close to it too, and I don't remember what you were talking about, but I'm talking about the social and psychological process that we go through. We're going through the failure process that also allows us to recover, learn, go. And you have to, as business leaders, go through that in context of your and model the process.
Yeah. So you're trying to get what was their process around identifying and managing. Yeah. Do you understand what she's asking?
Yeah, I mean, there's like 1,000 micro failures a second, right? Kind of thing. It's your, like, if you're raising money, everybody's going to tell you no.
Yeah.
Right? If early stage, you're casting your net for customers, but your product's not ready, right? And so there's a ton of customers that are not a fit, that will be a fit later on, but you're like, you're breaking eggs or whatever. Like it's that process, and it's failure. You'll have setbacks.
How did you personally deal with that? How do you get in a mental state to deal with that? Whether it be, did you have a process to deal with that kind of failure? Is that kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I think now it's knowing what's coming. At the time, it's just like internalizing all that stuff is not necessarily super productive, and you realize over time like kind of what matters, what doesn't matter. But the big thing is having, because if you're like I was married at the time when I started Crowd Compass, I didn't have any kids or anything, but and we were bootstrapping, so like my personal account dollars, right, was like on the wrong trend, and you just have a point at which it's like you agree up front like what failure looks like. It's literally having a line in the sand
on your own personal, like emotional and financial.
Absolutely. I'm not going. This is the absolute failure point, and because people will keep moving the line, like it's really hard because you get like a little bit of hope or whatever, and you just have to really have an absolute.
We got that investor meeting next week. Yeah, but we're it's way past the line.
It's being honest with yourself.
So does Oregon Angel ever take negative credit for epic crash and burns?
What do you mean?
Well, so you're a strong investor in a company. It fails miserably. You got to just say that the leader of that company was crap. That's their problem. Or do you
Well, yeah. So we're actively on the boards with companies, and so we know ahead of time where things are going, and we try to help them not go that direction. But yeah, we've had a couple that we've just picked wrong industries. Not a lot, fortunately. Actually,
Do you ever reinvest to soften the blow?
Not on that side. Like if the company's not going well, that's not probably where we're going to reinvest. If they're growing, that's the nature of the business, right? If you're growing and you need more fuel for the fire to grow faster, we'll reinvest on those terms. We just finished one 2 months ago.
You're not particularly leveraged very well as a founder in those situations.
Yeah.
So try to avoid that.
Yeah.
Is it good money after bad? If you've made a bad decision,
well, it's very
it's not going well?
So very intentionally, our thesis is that we will reinvest if there's another investors coming in. And so who is that lead investor for that second round?
So recently, the startup community generally was really helpful with the Intel layoffs. That's to me a sense of positive contribution for no financial gain. Correct. So that's one example.
That was a bunch of company, and so I am very familiar with what that was. And there was a lot of people who were offering to help them, but a bunch of talented engineers from a well-established company became available, and a bunch of people who happened to need positions filled.
Not just engineers.
Yeah, not just engineers. A bunch of people opened up and accepted them in. That's a win-win. I mean, there was a lot of people who helped organize it. They didn't win a lot out of it, but in general, like companies, investors, and folks don't do things solely out of the kindness of their heart. It's usually in addition to the kindness of their heart.
So figure out how to position it like that.
Yeah.
If you're doing one of those things out of the kindness of your heart, position it like that.
Yeah. Honestly, yeah, it's brass tacks, but that's true. You wouldn't go after a customer if you thought they were a terrible customer. Just because you wanted to do right by them. No. That's my opinion. I do not hold that for them. Yeah, you?
So if they're not doing it solely for the kindness of their heart, then why are the companies responsible for all these meetings?
So I have
hiring, by the way.
Yeah. So I think everyone on there is hiring. I know specifically why every single person that has ever sponsored anything that I've ever done, specifically why they're doing it, and I make them say it when they come up to say they're sponsoring. So if you're not aware of why people are cutting checks, then I would dig in and ask that question. Like, I have my own assertions of why New Relic is, and Christian can speak to it directly, but yeah, the world goes around by a lot of ways. People do it because they want to be part of a positive community, but in the end, it's being associated with that brand does have upside. So that's my opinion, though.
Yeah, we do a lot beyond. We only invest in less than 10 companies a year. We have what we call 50 companies that we have engaged or have connected investors with the companies to help them be successful. And we have office hours every week to meet with anybody who wants to come meet with us. Most of it's companies that we're probably not going to invest in, but we're trying to help them be successful. And it's really pretty simple. We want Oregon Angel Fund to continue to grow. And in 10 years, I want you to be successful and come join the fund and help the next round of startups here in Portland.
It's like the long tail, right? I like helping other people succeed. because we'll all work together at some point in the future, right? Like it's, you know, when I first came to town, John helped introduce me to a bunch of people. I was brand new to Portland, had experience in the mobile area. So look, someone connected me with John, and he was like super instrumental in getting me connected with the community here. And it's just like, someone does it for you, it's the currency of which we operate, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I think part of the reason why a lot of people help out so much is because I think in the end, no one knows who is going to be successful. So you're trying to support them the best you can, and I mean that's just relationships. You know, you build relationships and you support them as much as possible, knowing that you know there's going to be a day when you could need a job, or they're doing something that's really cool, and now you know them, and so you learn more about it. Or for me personally, I just want to know everything. So I try to know as many people who do as many diverse things, so I can be very, very aware, so I can make better decisions. But that's my own personal reason. Everyone has their own, I'm sure. So, yeah, big hearts, but there's always a good mind behind it. Typically, people who are doing a lot. Yeah, we got a last question. Who wants to do it? Anybody?
A lot of pressure.
Christian, do you have a question? Well then how? Oh, last one.
Goes back to the advisor thing. So Brian Chesky won't reply to my emails. Will he reply to yours?
Email him again, and then email him again, and then try to find the coffee shop he goes to, find out where his work is, go work in the coffee shop across from it. No joke.
Actually get connected with his executive assistant.
That's exactly right.
She won't either.
Yeah,
Find someone that knows him.
Yeah.
That can say, hey, I met this great guy who's doing this really cool thing and could really use your help.
We've chatted before. Just look on my connections and go to Bourbon with Barbara Stark. So there's some good hints if you guys are looking to figure out how to network. Go to these and talk to the people who are there. I'm sure you can try to snag them before they run off. One of these two guys. But I mean, in general, it's not that hard to get help. Everyone wants to be helpful because it's human nature.
It's like how valuable is it to you?
Yeah.
Right. Like, and how much hustle can you afford to put into it? Right. And if it's really valuable, you'll figure out how to do it.
I'd love to chat more about it, but in Seattle, when Foursquare first came out, I found every investor and every C-level person and every startup that I admired. I followed them on Foursquare and Twitter, and I would stalk the locations that they typically went to, and it made a map after being in Seattle for 3 months of exactly where they all hung out. And guess where I hung out every waking moment that I wasn't working, that I wasn't like, and even when I was working on my company, I just hung out there and then remembered their face on my computer and just did it. I mean, if you don't know anybody, that's a good way to do it. Or come early to the event, and we're all stuck here doing nothing for 20, 30 minutes before. Just come talk. We're bored.
Be interesting.
Be interesting. On that, first, can we say thank you to Christian for hosting this? Really awesome. And Tao for co-hosting. Wave, that's Therese from Tao. And thank you to John and Dave. Yay!